Welcome back to Ultimate Reddit Drama. We're incredibly grateful for your support before we begin today's tale. Tell us which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience now. Let's dive into today's story. The night was deep, but for me, it was nothing short of an endless darkness. My home, once so full of love and happiness, now seemed to me like an empty and cold cage. The pictures hanging on the walls, in which we looked like a happy family, were now taunting me. "This child is not yours." These words of my wife kept echoing in my mind again and again. My breathing was pounding. My heartbeat was so fast that I felt like my chest was going to burst. I looked up at his face. There was no sign of remorse, just fear. What would happen now? I clenched my fist. "Whose is it?" He bowed his head. "Tell me." My voice was so loud that the windows in the room trembled. She trembled and said, "Your brother's—" I felt as if someone had pulled the ground from under my feet. My world was shattered. My own brother. I have always raised him not as a younger brother, but as my own son, the one I educated with my own money, who lived on my trust without any hard work. Did he have a relationship with my wife? My blood boiled. "You're lying," I said coldly. "No, it's true," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. I picked up the phone and called my brother. He didn't pick up the phone. I called again. This time he got up but didn't say anything. "What did you do?" I said with gritting my teeth. He was silent. "Speak, haramkhor." "Brother, His voice trembled with fear. "Come home right away." My wife was crying, but I didn't care about her. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I couldn't kill him with my own hands, but I wouldn't miss any opportunity to teach him a lesson. I couldn't think of anything. I just stood in that dark room, wondering what would happen next. The doorbell rang. I looked slowly at the door. My breathing was still rapid. A wave of anger ran through my body. I knew it was going to be my brother. Seeing the face of the man I had always raised as a son now made me feel disgusting. I opened the door. He stood there, with his head bowed, eyes fixed on the ground, as if he already knew that I would never forgive him. "Come in," I said, my voice as cold as ice. He came in hesitantly. My wife was sitting on the couch, head bowed, tears streaming down her eyes. But I didn't care about that. I stood right in front of my brother. "How long has this been going on?" He looked at me, but didn't say anything. I asked, "Since when?" "Brother, I'm sorry." My blood boiled even more. "Sorry? Do you want me to forgive you?" He remained silent. "Did you know she was my wife? Is he part of my family?" "Yes." His voice was low. I threw my punch towards him, but stopped myself at the last second. My hands were shaking. "Why did you do this to me?" My voice was no longer angry, but deeply painful. He bowed his head. "I don't know, brother, that's it. Done it? You ruined my life and you don't care?" My wife started sobbing. "Please listen to me." "Shut up," I roared. There was silence in the room. My eyes were now fixed on my brother. "I don't consider you a brother anymore." He slowly raised his head, his eyes hurting, but I didn't care anymore. I called my lawyer. "Get the divorce papers ready." My wife looked at me with tears in her eyes. No, Alex, please don't do that." "What did you think? I'll forgive you." "But my son—" I had a pain in my chest. My son. My child's life had now become part of this mess, but I couldn't be weak. "Leave my house by tomorrow morning," I said coldly. The morning sun was peeping through the window, but to me, it felt like a dark prison. In every corner of the house, there was only deception. Everything that once comforted me now filled me with hatred. My wife sent my son to school. She was still in the house, but her presence made me uneasy. He didn't dare to sit in front of me. I was sitting alone at the dining table with divorce papers in front of me. I picked up the cup of coffee, but my hand was shaking. Was I really ready for it? Can we talk? His voice was like that of a weak, broken man. I looked up, but there was no mercy in my eyes. What do you have left to say? Please, just give me a chance. I know what I did was wrong, but... But what? I cut him off. But do you regret it? Or are you afraid that your life will be ruined? He bowed his head. I don't know. I'm just... Tears flowed from her eyes. I clenched my fists. How long has this been going on? She didn't say anything for a few moments. Then she said very softly, For a year. I felt like someone had stabbed me in the chest. 1 year. The whole 12 months. 365 days. The woman I had spent my life with was the one who was cheating on me. I stood up. I can't stand you in this house even for a second. Get out today. But my son. I'll think about it. But you. I took a deep breath. You're not a part of my life anymore. There was helplessness in his eyes. Where shall I go? I don't care. She was trying to say something else, but then the doorbell rang. I opened the door. There stood my mother. His eyes were red. Deep wrinkles appeared on his face. Right behind him, my brother was standing. I felt like blood was boiling. What have you come to do? I asked angrily. My mom tried to put her hand on my shoulder, but I shrugged. Boy, we need to talk. You don't have to talk to me, Mom. You hid everything from me, even though you knew it beforehand. My mother had guilt on her face, but my brother still stood with his head bowed. Why did you come here? I asked him directly. Brother, please, just give me a chance. Chance? I burst out laughing. What should I do? Shall I forgive you? Shall I give a hug and say it's all right? My mother tried to hold my hands, but I shook them. Son, he's your brother. Don't you value relationships? I looked up at my mother, and for the first time, there was just anger in my eyes. No, Mom, I don't care about relationships anymore, because I've been an orphan since the day you supported me behind my back. There was silence in the room. You two get out of my life. But son, go away, Mom. My mother looked into my eyes, probably to find a son who was now dead. Then she took a deep breath and walked out the door without saying a word. My brother paused for a second, then he left. After closing the door, I took a deep breath. My wife was still standing there. Now you go too. There was the last hope left in his eyes. Is there really no way out? For you? Never. She was silent for a few moments, then picked up her bag and headed for the door. Shall we ever meet again? He asked as he opened the door. I looked at him. Number. The house was now empty, but the silence was unsettling. I was standing in the middle of the living room, trying to piece together the scattered clippings of my own life. It was the same house where there was once love, laughter, and now there were only echoes of deception. I ran my hands over my face. The mind was numb, but somewhere inside there was a boil. I called my lawyer. The divorce process has to be expedited. Are you sure? I never wanted anything more definite. There was a loud knock on the door as soon as he hung up the phone. My eyebrows furrowed. Who was it now? I opened the door and saw the front. My sister was standing. We'll have to talk. There was trepidation in his voice. I didn't answer, just stepped aside so he could come in. I'm sorry, brother. I looked into his eyes. She was really embarrassed. But was it enough? You should have told me earlier, I said coldly. My mother stopped me. And you obeyed them? She remained silent. You knew, didn't you? For a whole year? His eyes drooped. You let this hell grow in my own house and didn't tell me anything. And now, have you come to apologize? She trembled. I was scared. I thought you were going to fall apart. I bowed my head and laughed slightly. You thought I was going to be shattered? He shook his head. But you didn't think I deserved to know? Tears welled up in her eyes. What if I had told you? I thought for a second. At least I haven't lived another year in this poison. The room fell silent. Now what had to happen has happened. Why are you here? He snapped his fingers. Mom S. in the hospital. My heart stopped for a moment, but I didn't respond. He's had a heart attack, she said. Doctors say he had a lot of stress. What do you want from me? She wants to meet you. I took a deep breath. I don't care about that. My sister sighed. Brother, she is our mother. I looked straight into his eyes. She's just the mother of the man who ruined my life. Can you really leave him in this condition? Didn't he leave me? My sister tried to hold my hand, but I stepped back and said, It's too late now. There was silence in the room again. After a while, she got up with a deep breath and said, Well, I can't force you, but one day you'll regret it. Maybe, I said coldly. She left without saying anything else. I sat there. Did I really become stone-hearted? Nope. Stone-hearted people are those who deceive their loved ones. I took a deep breath and headed to my son's room. He had returned from school and was doing something on his laptop. Boy, I said softly. He raised his head. Yes, Dad? Are you all right? He was silent for a moment, then nodded. You? I tried to smile slightly. I'm okay too. He looked me in the eye for a while, then said softly, Dad, won't Mom ever come back? My throat went dry. I said quietly, No, son. Never now. His eyes widened. I pulled her into my arms and hugged her tightly. We don't have anyone but each other, son. He nodded slowly. Yes, Dad. There was silence in the room, but for the first time, that silence was not filled with pain. It was a new beginning. The silence of the night had thickened. I stood on the balcony with a glass of whiskey in my hand, looking at the twinkling lights of the city. There was a chill in the air, but there was a simmer inside me, of anger, of pain, of remorse. The phone screen was burning out repeatedly. My sister called several times since the news of my mom being hospitalized, but I didn't pick up a single call. What do I have to do with him? Did they ever think about my pain? Was my mother worried about how broken her eldest son was? Every time I imagined her face, only one image came to my mind. The same mother who hid my brother's sins, who allowed me to be betrayed in my own house. I shook the phone and threw it on the table and closed my eyes. Then the doorbell rang. At this hour of the night, I walked slowly and opened the door, and my ex-wife was standing in front of me. Her eyes were swollen. She was trembling. He was wearing a jacket, but his lips were blue in spite of the cold. Will you let me in? His voice was trembling. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him coldly. What do you have to do here? Please, just 5 minutes, she whispered. 1,000 questions arose in my mind. Should I let him in? Should I leave him on the street? But then I took a deep breath and stepped aside. Come on. She hesitantly came in and stood in the living room, as if this house had now become a stranger to her. What do you want? My voice was hoarse. I've hurt you so much, she said softly. Do you understand that now? He bowed his head. There is no excuse for what I did. I don't have the right to forgive, but... But what? I asked sharply. I realized what I'd lost after I lost everything. I laughed, but the laughter was poisonous. Did you lose? What did you lose? A husband who loved you? A son who had hopes for you? Or the safe life I gave you? Tears flowed from her eyes. Yes, he said in a trembling voice. And more than that, I've lost your respect. I shook my head. You're here to get rid of your guilt? He looked into my eyes, and for the first time I saw fear in him. You hate my brother, me too. But have you ever wondered why I did it? My eyebrows were furrowed. Matlab, she said tremblingly, because I hated myself. The room became cold. I realized how perfect you were and how useless I was. You did everything for me, but still I was empty inside. And when your brother came, he took advantage of my weakness. I clenched my fists. You mean you were trying to blame me now? No, he said quickly. I'm just saying I was a weak woman, and maybe I still am. I took a deep breath. What do you want from me? She snapped her fingers and then whispered, one more chance. My whole body went numb. What? I'm going to give up everything. I'll apologize. I'll kneel before you. Bus, just let me come back. I felt like I was dreaming. Are you mad? I said sharply. Maybe, she said, wiping away tears, but I'm just asking you for a chance. I looked at her, but there I saw the same woman who had destroyed me. I took a deep breath and looked straight into his eyes. You can't come back. His lips trembled. Why? Because I can never forgive you. The room fell silent. Then, without saying a word, she picked up her bag and headed towards the door. When she reached the door, she paused for a moment. If ever. His voice was broken. If you ever change, remember, I'll always wait. I didn't respond. She walked out, and I closed the door. Looking back, the room seemed even emptier than before. But the strange thing was, now that emptiness was comforting to me. There was a deep silence in the room. I stood there by the door, but there was no movement inside me now. No pain, no anger, no remorse. Just a strange emptiness. She was gone. Probably forever. I peered out of the living room window. The road was deserted, its shadow now lost in the darkness. Am I doing it right? Do I still love him? I didn't want to answer that question myself. I picked up a glass of whiskey and sat down on the sofa. But when I took the first sip, I realized that this wine no longer seemed as effective as before. Maybe it's because I didn't want to numb myself anymore. The phone rang again. My sister's name was flashing on the screen. I finally picked up the call. You're too late. His voice was full of anger. What happened? My voice was flat. Mom's condition is getting worse. Papa is saying that he may have to be shifted to the ICU. I sighed coldly. So? So? He shouted. That's Mom, Alex. Will you leave them dead alone? I kept quiet. They want you to come. I pursed my lips. And what if I don't go? Then don't think I'll ever forgive you, she said coldly and hung up. I threw the phone aside and rested my head back. A strange storm was raging inside me. Memories of my mother came to mind. As a child, when he applied medicine to my injury, when I fell and he picked me up in his arms. But then, the same mother who was covering up my brother's crimes. The same mother who, instead of standing by me, made me a liar. How could I forget this pain? I took a deep breath and stood up and went to the balcony. A black SUV was stopped on the road below. My forehead shrugged. Who came here that late at night? The door of the SUV opened and a stranger man came out of it. Tall stature, black hair, and leather jacket. He raised his head and looked straight at me. I immediately moved away from the edge of the balcony and switched off the lights. Who was this guy? Was it my delusion? Or had you seen me somewhere before? I slowly pulled back the curtain and peered. The SUV was still parked there, but now the man was not inside. He had disappeared. I got goosebumps, I looked at the door. Did he come in? There was an awkward silence in the room. I gently pulled out my gun box under the couch and opened it. The 9mm gun was cold and heavy. I checked his magazine, full of it. Walking slowly, I peered into every corner of the apartment. There was nothing. But my heart was pounding. Somebody was here. I picked up the phone and started calling the security guard. At that very moment, a faint voice came from behind. "You hurt him so much, Alex." The phone fell out of my hand. I turned around quickly. My brother was standing in front of me. My blood ran cold. "You ... I said angrily. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, but there was fire in his eyes. "Don't I have the right to see my own brother?" She said softly. I held my gun tightly. "How did you get into my house?" He laughed and said, "Brother, do you really think I can't get into your house? I have always defeated you at every step." My anger was simmering. "What do you want?" He moved slowly. "Just one thing," she whispered. "I want you to get out of this game." I looked into his eyes. "Matlab?" His smile deepened. "You're getting in my way, brother. You're divorced. Your wife loves me. Your son sees me now. My mom loves me more than you. You don't fit into this family anymore." Blood ran through my brain. "Do you want me to disappear?" I asked in a cold voice. "Yes," she whispered. I pointed my gun at him. "Are you out of your mind?" He smiled and pulled something out of his pocket. "A USB drive. There's everything it can do to kill you, bro," he said. I took a deep breath. "What's this?" He threw a drive towards me. "There's evidence in this. Your old business deals, the paperwork you didn't fill correctly, and some things you couldn't even guess yourself." My throat went dry. "What if I don't obey you?" He smiled. "So the police, the courts, and maybe the people who want you killed, they'll all be after you." The room became cold. I slowly picked up the USB drive and stared at it. I had no choice. I could either stay in this game, or I could be finished forever. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to give up so easily. There was an awkward silence in the room. My brother stood there, the same nasty smile on the lips that always teased me. There was a strange satisfaction in his eyes, as if he had trapped me in a trap from which it was impossible to escape. I had a USB drive in my hand. My breathing was pounding and my mind was racing. "What do you think, brother?" she said softly. "Now, do you understand that you can't mess with me?" I gripped the drive tightly and lowered my gun slightly, but kept eyes on it. "What if I call the police?" I said calmly. His laughter echoed through the room. "The police? And you think they won't listen to me?" he said with a smile. "This drive doesn't just contain evidence against you. It contains secrets that can completely erase you." My lips clenched. "I understood this game a long time ago, Alex," she continued. "You were always the eldest son, everyone's darling, the real heir to the business. And me? I have always been your shadow. But now, all that has changed." His words burned like fire inside me. "What do you want?" I asked in a cold voice. "Simple," he said, tightening his eyes. "Leave behind all your share of possessions, far from this city, away from this country, and let your wife and children stay with me." My blood boiled. "How dare you think that?" I said angrily. "Dare," he said, putting his hand inside his jacket. "I don't need any courage, because I have evidence against you, my mother's support, and most importantly, your fear." My eyes were fixed on his hand. Was he pulling out a gun? My fingers tightened on the trigger, but then there was a loud knock on the door. We both stared at each other. The knock became louder. Who could it be? "Open the door," came a stern voice. I looked at my brother, but this time his face had discolored. "Did you call anyone?" he whispered angrily. I nodded. "Number." Then there was a loud jolt, and the door was almost about to break. Was it the police? My brother slowly began to retreat. "You've played a trick, Alex," he said, gritting his teeth. The door was finally broken, and 3 men entered in a black suit, wearing dark glasses. A shiver ran through my veins. It wasn't the police. "Alex Brown?" a man asked without any gesture. I took a deep breath. "Yes?" "We want to talk to you and your brother." My brother was now drenched in sweat. "Who are you guys?" he said angrily. The man in front of him took something out of his pocket and held it out to me. I saw an agency badge. My head spinned. It was the FBI. I looked at my brother. His face was white. "You two are walking with us," said the agent in a calm voice. "Why?" I asked with a bitter laugh. "Because we feel that what's happening isn't limited to your family." My brother took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere," he cried, putting his hand inside his jacket. But before he could do anything, a shot was fired. The whole room shook by the sound of the blast. I saw my brother had fallen down. Blood was pouring from his chest. His eyes widened. "No," I screamed. The FBI agent put his weapon back in the holster and looked at me. He tried to take out the gun. I knelt there, my brother's body freezing cold before my eyes. What has happened? The agent moved on. "Now we have to go with you, Alex. We have a lot to know." I took a deep breath. Everything was ruined. I never thought my life would come to this point. My wife was gone. My son is probably going to be away from me now. My mother had already turned her back on me, and now my brother. I was picked up and taken out of the room. Maybe that was justice for me.